Hello everyone, my name is Cesar Iliano and I'm the Content Director for BNamericas. In this webinar, we will discuss the current trends, opportunities and challenges in Latin America's power sector. Our energy editor, Michael Place, will begin this webinar with a look at Colombia, and he will be followed by Joao Montenegro, David Casalas, James Young and myself as we discuss Brazil, Peru, Mexico, Chile and Argentina. I would like to take this opportunity to remind our subscribers that they can read about the latest developments in Latin America's rapidly growing green hydrogen segment by accessing our new Intelligence Series report on the topic. We have also just published an Intelligence Series report about opportunities for clean energy investments in the region's mining industry. For those who aren't yet subscribers, we invite you to visit www.BNamericas.com and ask for a demo to take a look at our reports, our news stories, analysis, and project and company profiles, a set of essential information to grow your company. So now I will leave you with Mike.
Thank you, Cesar. So Colombia expects to bring online 2.5 gigawatts of installed capacity by 2022. Lifting the share of renewables in the power generation mix to 12% from around 1% today. Investments in these projects are expected to reach $2.5 billion. According to the Energy Ministry, there are currently 16 transmission projects under development across the country, many of which will provide connections to new solar and wind generation initiatives in the country's north. Meanwhile, power sector regulator CREG recently published new grid connection guidelines for self-generators with installed capacity of up to 5 megawatts. The initiative forms part of broader efforts to reduce bureaucracy for developers of wind, solar, and biomass projects. Last July, the regulator published a draft resolution establishing guidelines for the implementation of advanced metering infrastructure. The document basically outlines procedures that allow small-scale generators to inject surplus energy to the national grid by using low-cost bidirectional meters. According to Colombia's Mines and Energy Ministry, 11 million households will have AMI technology by 2030. Now moving on to the 2021 energy agenda in Colombia, which is headlined by green hydrogen, geothermal, and offshore wind. The government has said that it expects to publish a roadmap for hydrogen and geothermal energy by the end of the first quarter. Late last year, President Iván Duque announced a cooperation agreement with Chile for green hydrogen development and also said plans were underway for up to 3 pilot projects in the segment. Officials have also said that the first steps are being taken to tap Colombia's offshore wind potential. The Duque administration is also preparing an option of long-term power purchase agreements for free market industrial and commercial consumers in the first half of the year. It follows the first private auction for renewable energy held by Bogota-based company Renovatio, the results of which are due in April. The Energy Ministry last month launched a bidding process for the country's first grid-scale energy storage project as part of broader efforts to reinforce power supply in the Caribbean coast. Economic and technical bids are due on April 6, and the project is expected to be completed in June 2023. Interested participants have until April 27 to submit technical and economic bids for the $700 million Pacific LNG project, which will be Colombia's second liquefied natural gas initiative. The project includes an associated pipeline that will connect the import terminal to Yumbo, near Cali. Now, Grupo Energía Bogotá and Ecopetrol have both made public their desire to acquire a majority stake in state-controlled transmission company Interconexión Eléctrica, otherwise known as ISA, which has operations in Colombia, Brazil, Chile, Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, and Central America. The sale is seen as vital to the government's hopes of reducing its fiscal deficit and maintaining the country's credit rating. So all of that said, there are several obstacles and challenges facing the government and investors, not least of which is resistance from social and environmental groups. Colombia has had a long history of community opposition to electric power, oil, and mining projects. Officials have said that a law enshrining the right of communities and ethnic groups to prior consultation is expected to be presented to Congress in the first half of the year. It is hoped the move will end legal disputes that have long afflicted energy infrastructure and mining initiatives in the country. Colombia is also deeply divided politically, perhaps even more so since the historic 2016 peace deal with FARC rebels. The current administration has introduced a number of regulatory and legislative measures to attract private investment, such as corporate tax breaks, a simplification of bureaucratic processes, new tenders, and options for energy and infra projects. Now the next presidential election will take place in 2022, and there is a fear that many of these changes could be undone by a new government. There are also transmission concerns. The government has overhauled regulations for allocation of power transmission capacity to ease bottlenecks that threaten to leave new generation projects without connections. It has been reported that there are currently 29 stalled generation projects totaling 348 megawatts of capacity of transmission rights that could be transferred to other developers. So with that, I'll pass it to my colleague, João Montenegro, who will talk about Brazil.
Thanks, Mike. So the first topic I would like to address relates to the power generation and transmission tenders scheduled for 2021. The Brazilian government, after a very slow year in 2020, will hold 4 new energy for greenfield projects only and 4 existing energy auctions this year. And there are basically 2 novelties: the participation of inflexible thermoelectric power plants, meaning full-time operating plants, which could provide natural gas producers with a steady demand, and waste-to-energy projects using urban solid waste, which will be able to participate for the first time. Some market sources believe that as the pandemic has made power distributors' load more uncertain, it is likely the next regulated tenders will see lower demand. However, on the other hand, we're talking about a demand that isn't just from 2021, but also from last year, as part of these tenders were originally scheduled to take place in 2020. Besides, even though the free power market is attracting a growing number of power generators and consumers, the regulated tenders will also be taking place at a time that matches the ESG agenda. Additionally, the Brazilian government will hold an isolated systems auction to supply northern states and several municipalities that are not connected to the national grid, and at least 2 power tenders expected to attract at least 2.3 billion reais, approximately $400 million. Another very important issue in Brazil is the free power market expansion. Brazil is expected to see another positive year as the government keeps flexibilizing the requirements for consumers to migrate to the free power market, where they can access more flexible contracts amid the uncertainties associated with the pandemic. Also, with the adoption of the hourly price system in 2021, electric power traders will be able to sell electricity for different prices according to the client's hourly consumption. It's important to understand that the free power market expansion is very much in line with the growth of the renewable energy projects in Brazil, for example, via distributed generation systems and power purchase agreements. Renewable sources accounted for 70% of the 5 gigawatts added in installed capacity in 2020 in Brazil. Wind power, for example, was the highlight, accounting for 35% of the total. And Brazil has around 40 gigawatts under development, of which 15 gigawatts are photovoltaic solar power and 12.6 gigawatts are wind. Another very important topic is the integration, the growing integration between natural gas and electric power in Brazil. Back in 2019, Porto de Sergipe thermoelectric power plant began operating. It is supplied with LNG from the joint venture between ExxonMobil and Qatar Petroleum. This year, the GNA1 of Gás Natural Açu and the Azulão Jaguatirica thermal plants, the latter of Eneva, will come online, The first will be fueled with LNG, and the latter by gas produced in the Azulão onshore field in the Amazon rainforest. In January, US-based New Fortress Energy acquired Golar Power and will develop an LNG terminal and gas-fired power plant at the Suape port in Pernambuco state. And several projects that are being developed foresee the use of onshore and offshore gas, like Imetame's Prosperidade 2, Eneva's Parnaíba 4 and 5 in the Parnaíba Basin, and Shell's Marlim Azul thermal plant in Macaé, Rio de Janeiro state, which is the first plant in Brazil to be fueled with pre-salt gas. The last topic relates to Eletrobras, the Brazilian state-owned power holding. It has increased its 5-year investment plan by 27% to 41.1 billion reais, around $8 billion. In 2020 only, it plans to invest 8 billion reais, 35% of which in the Angra 3 nuclear power plant in Rio de Janeiro state, whose construction is expected to be resumed this year. In January, Wilson Ferreira Jr. Resigned from his post as CEO of Eletrobras, mainly due to the lack of progress on the company's privatization plan. He will now take over BR Distribuidora, Petrobras' former retail subsidiary, fuel retail subsidiary. A federal bill to privatize Eletrobras was sent to Congress by the government at the end of 2019 and still needs to be approved by both the lower house and then by the Senate, where it faces stiff opposition. The new presidents of the lower house and Senate, respectively Arthur Lira and Rodrigo Pacheco, are fierce representatives of the so-called Centrão, which is the physiological core base of the National Congress. So even though both were Bolsonaro's choices for the Congress, none is a legitimate defendant of privatizations, since Brazilian congressmen are eager to keep their posts in state-owned companies and will not make it easy for the privatization to take place. So now we'll pass to David Casillas, who will talk about Peru.
Thank you, Joao. In Peru, much of the immediate focus is on April's presidential election and the continuing impact of COVID-19. The heated electoral climate, albeit tempered by mobility restrictions due to the pandemic, is expected as more than a dozen candidates jockey for position, which in turn is projected to lead to a second round in June, with the new head of state scheduled to begin a 5-year term in July. Runoffs also were held in the past 3 presidential elections, indicative in part of the country's multi-party system. Early polls have pro-business candidate George Forsyth leading voter preference, but in the low double digits, followed by 3 contenders, free market Keiko Fujimori, centrist Johnny Lezcano, and leftist Veronica Mendoza. And against this backdrop, the structural reform of the power sector has continued, a process that is expected to advance should Forsyth, Fujimori, or even Lezcano win. As part of the power sector reform, a white book is scheduled to be submitted in March that will propose long-term recommendations for strengthening the institutional framework, transforming the wholesale power market, for example, integrating renewable energies, innovating on the distribution front through smart grids, and streamlining the regulatory framework for transmission. Previously, as part of the sector reform, final reports were submitted to address near-term issues, in particular natural gas pricing, non-conventional renewables in isolated zones, power supply calls, rural electrification, and new transmission infrastructure. This reform has raised expectations among many, but others have expressed concern that the proposed policy roadmap falls short. And although energy authorities have been carrying out regulatory tweaks, particularly related to natural gas, advancement at the legislative level has been lukewarm, and one stakeholder even went as far as to say that today, approaching Congress is like entering Chernobyl in bathing suits. Regarding renewable energy, the authorities now call for these sources to account for 15% by 2030, up from the previous benchmark of 5%, which is the current installed capacity of solar and wind combined. The new benchmark is attainable given the healthy pipeline of renewable energy projects in the early stage. However, many developers may be in a holding pattern until there is greater clarity of potential changes to the regulatory and legislative framework. COVID-19 also has pushed back timetables, including financial closure. One of the issues being pushed by stakeholders is recognizing the firm capacity of wind and solar, and an initial step was taken in 2019 when the investment regulator OSIGNERMIN modified the technical procedure to calculate the firm capacity of renewable energies, lifting market barriers for wind plants, but not so much solar. The weight of natural gas, which currently accounts for half of power supply in the energy mix, also will be another factor in terms of the incorporation of renewable energies. And this brings me to the Southern Energy Hub. Officials have said they expect to advance the process to find a new operator to complete the Southern Gas Pipeline this year, a project now known as the Southern Zone Integrated Gas Transport System (SITGAS). Part of the gas would supply dual fuel reserve power generation plants, which some market observers say will have to come online in the coming years to cover growing demand, particularly from mining operations. Moving to transmission, this area is the real mover in the power sector market. At least a dozen power transmission projects are expected to go into service in Peru this year, as electricity consumption is forecast to grow in the double digits after recovering from depressed demand in 2020 due to COVID-19, albeit demand already is back at pre-pandemic levels. Authorities and stakeholders have been pushing to decentralize the build-out of the transmission and distribution grid beyond Lima to address congestion and accompany efforts to develop new economic zones. Recently, Peru's power grid coordinator increased the estimated investment cost of transmission in its 2021-30 roadmap to 1.64 billion from an initial 1.3 billion. And Peru's investment promotion agency Proinversión this year also plans to award infrastructure to reinforce dispatch in Madre de Dios and Piura regions, as well as a project to connect with Ecuador. Socio-environmental conflict also is very latent, and although much of this conflict has been concentrated in the hydrocarbon sector, specifically oil and gas exploration, many more communities are feeling empowered to are being more empowered, and one is seeing more, for example, opposition such as road closures. And recently, a hydroelectric developer declared force majeure after communities have expressed opposition to what they see as impact of the hydroelectric project on their water supply. And finally, on the national determined contributions, which also play a major role in how renewables will be incorporated into the country recently increased its greenhouse gas emissions reduction target to 40% from 30% by 2030. And even the environment minister said that this will be attained with the greater incorporation of renewable energies. Among the energy-specific actions of the government's latest catalog of 92 adaptation climate change measures include the promotion of hydro optimization systems, principally storage and regulation infrastructure to strengthen electricity supply security. Authorities also look to incorporate such measures and others into investment promotion. And with that, I'd like to pass the talk over to James, who will highlight what's going on in Mexico.
Thanks, David. Yes, my name is James Young, and I'm going to be talking today about what's going on with the electric sector in Mexico. Right now, one of the most important topics being discussed is a plan to absorb a variety of different autonomous independent regulators into basically under direct executive control, with Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or AMLO, as everyone calls him, looking to centralize his power in the energy sector and create his new vision of electricity sector basically dominated by state-owned utility CFE and the oil and gas dominated by Pemex. So, the issue is that by doing so, by getting rid of these bodies, it could jeopardize private investment, as well as throw away years of developed regulations and potentially breaching trade agreements. Most importantly, the USMCA trade agreement that replaced NAFTA last year with the U.S. and Canada. He said AMLO has recently been talking about basically drafting a bill to dissolve several autonomous bodies, with the concept that it is unnecessary public spending. And while he did not specify all the bodies that he would be, changing, the announcement last month came with, at the same time that Energy Minister Rocio Nale was calling for energy regulator CRE to have some of its powers restored back to the energy ministry, which she oversees. Similar proposals regarding grid control center SENACE, which was created as part of the 2014 energy reforms, have been made by state power company CFE, which has said that the national grid would be safer and more efficient if it handled the operations themselves. Of course, this has spawned criticism that returning CRE's powers to the energy ministry could damage regulatory stability. With SENACE being the energy ministry being able to carry out the government's nationalistic energy agenda with fewer checks and balances. Other actions that López Obrador has been doing recently includes delaying permits for private players across the board, for example, even to get private gas stations going, and also tinkering with power and fuel prices in such a way to favor CFE and to disfavor private generation. This kind of leads into the next question, which is what is going on with renewable energy and whether it will continue to grow here in Mexico. And it's a good question. I think it's safe to say that you can expect some obstacles to renewables growth to be in place at least until the president's term ends in 2024, and very possibly thereafter as well. Mexico's renewable power capacity increased 13.4% from 2019 to the end of October, and that's as more solar and wind plants came online. So it has been growing, but that's mostly still from coming out of the 2014 energy reforms and the level playing field that was created then. López Obrador has attempted to roll back the reforms essentially roll back the wholesale electricity market through regulatory or administrative means, by pressuring regulators or looking to change policies. But this week, on Monday, the president raised the stakes, actually sending Congress a priority legislative package that would get him everything on his wish list in one go and restore CFE to being, again, a de facto monopoly. The chief reform in this proposal that has to be dealt with within 60 days under priority designation. The chief reform is establishing a hierarchy for dispatch on the national grid, where electricity produced by CFE at hydroelectric plants is given top priority, followed by any other CFE generated power. Then after that would be private solar and wind, and finally private combined cycle generation. And this would be regardless of what the prices are. The current established system is that the lowest price would go first. So this will, critics are automatically saying this is going to hurt and make electricity more expensive, and in addition to hurting competition. And business groups have, quickly spoken out against this. But the biggest setback since Monday has been the Mexico Supreme Court on Wednesday ruled that changes in regulations for the country's electricity market that were attempted last year through regulatory means, those changes that gave CFE, sort of monopoly-like status, are essentially unconstitutional. That's following a competition watchdog. The competition watchdog COFECE filed a lawsuit last year, and the Supreme Court backed them in saying that these policies go against the Constitution, go against what's, there should be equal access to the market in the electricity market. So essentially, this legislative package, which doesn't go into the constitutional level, that doesn't require constitutional changes, is likely going to be ruled, probably going to be ruled unconstitutional, even if it does pass. The question after that is what happens in June with the midterm elections. If Morena, the party of AMLO, can gain just a handful of seats, they will reach the supermajority with 2/3 in both houses, and they will be able to change the Constitution itself without opposition. So that's really where this is all leading to. And I think though that there are opportunities. That doesn't mean that the renewables are going to disappear. It just means that you should expect the government that you're going to have to play by, the administration's rules if you really want to get into Mexico. This gets into, what does this mean for Mexican energy infrastructure? With the second wave of Mexico's 2020-2024 infrastructure program, they added almost $6 billion in energy projects, bringing the total of the two waves of announcements, there's going to be a third one soon, to $11 billion in energy projects. But these are very heavily Pemex and CFE projects. Where on the CFE end, you're talking about thermoelectric combined cycle plant construction. There's a natural gas project to help bring gas to the southeast of Mexico for electricity generation. There is one private project that did make it to the list, the $2.35 billion liquefaction unit, LNG liquefaction unit at the Energía Costa Azul LNG terminal in Ensenada, Baja California, that is just getting underway this year, construction and work on it, with Simpra Energy subsidiary Innova. And that project hinges on an unusual authorization from the government pinned to an agreement with Innova's parent company, which the government committed to allowing last month to provide access to its gas pipelines. Essentially, they were going to do it, and then the government said, you can't, we won't let you. But they came up with this deal where CFE has access to the terminal, and they'll, in theory, be able to sell at some point their own gas overseas to compress and send, use it as a LNG terminal that they could piggyback on. And so in that way, they've been allowed to create this hub. Even though they already had all the permits and they had everything ready to go without the agreement, this is where you see, this administration saying, it doesn't matter. You do things how we want you to do them, and we can see here, this is exactly a case where it's working and it is underway and it's moving forward. So, that said, all of these projects that are coming out, none of them are renewable. None of them are solar. None of them are wind. And none of them have to deal with intermittence or storage or helping grid stability. And that is really where you're looking at the lacking in the infrastructure, the energy infrastructure in Mexico is, we had a widespread power outage on December 29th of last year that left 10.3 million users without power for 2 hours. And the CFE said that large proportion of wind and photovoltaic generators at the time basically destabilized the system and caused the blackout. This was their second or third excuse after they said there was a fire, wildfires, and really critics are saying you're just using this as an excuse to go against wind and solar. But you basically see how the government, the mindset is, they don't want to fix the problem of storage or reliability. They just want to use that. So, I think that there definitely are going to be possibilities. CFE and the government continue to say solar and wind are part of the bigger picture, and that private will be, partnerships in the future. But I would say listen carefully to what's happening now. Definitely engage with administration if you're looking at a bigger project to see where you fit in their plan. And this is going to be the case at least until 2024, when AMLO's term ends. Although, we need to see what happens if Moreno continues in power, or if there are constitutional changes. That could really be a long-term change to the marketplace that would require adaptation. That's it. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you now to Michael again, and he'll talk to you about Chile.
Thank you very much for that insight into Mexico, James. So Chile's power sector has proven to be quite resilient in the face of the coronavirus pandemic. Power demand is expected to rise by 2.25% annually for the next 20 years, exceeding pre-pandemic predictions, according to the latest annual forecast by Energy Commission CNE. Despite the effects of COVID-19, CNE's updated forecasts are higher than those made in 2019, when demand was expected to rise 2.1% every year through 2039. After falling just short of expectations last year amid coronavirus restrictions, demand is expected to rise 6% year on year in 2021, driven by an expected boom in consumption from deregulated market users. Among the biggest drivers of power demand are Chile's large industrial consumers, mainly in the country's sprawling copper mining industry in the north. In recent years, there's been a growing trend of large industrial and commercial customers switching to the deregulated segment, where they can seek tailor-made solutions. For example, large mining companies have been seeking certified renewable energy supply, which they can contract directly from generation companies to secure green label certification for their final products. The CNE's power demand forecasts impact the regularity and size of tenders to supply power distributors. Chile is set to conduct a new auction this year, as BNamericas has previously reported. The auction process will award supply of 2,310 gigawatt hours per year of generation that must come online in 2026 and will last for 15 years. Proposals by private players must be submitted on May 28th, and the new supply will be awarded on June 22nd. Chile is advancing a highly ambitious strategy to become a world-class exporter of green hydrogen by 2040. The current government has expressed a desire to leverage the low cost of its domestic clean energy and radically reduce vehicle emissions by encouraging widespread adoption of the fuel. The country aims to add 5 gigawatts of renewable capacity as part of electrolyzing units to produce hydrogen by 2025 and 30 gigawatts by 2030, more than Chile's current entire installed generation capacity. Officials have said that Chile could produce up to 160 megatons per year of green hydrogen and install 300 gigawatts of new capacity to produce it. The government has also set aside $50 million for a financing round for pilot projects that will be accessible to international and domestic players. In the transmission segment, a tender for the $1.2 billion Quimal-Loguirre high voltage power line is expected to be completed in the second half of the year. The 1,500 kilometre line is one of the region's biggest grid expansion projects and will mark a key milestone in Chile's plan to decarbonise its power matrix by enabling additional transport capacity from the north to the centre-south regions. There also could be a sharp rise in investment in independent grids associated with green hydrogen projects, although decisions about how this new power source will be integrated into the national energy mix have yet to be made. So with that, I'll pass it on to the Content Director, Cesar Iliano, who will talk about Argentina.
Thank you, Mike. So let's talk about Argentina, a complicated market, as we all know. What we see now in Argentina is that it's a calm present, but an uncertain future. Power generation in Argentina is being able to supply demand without problems now, despite the heat wave. However, the weak economic activity raises concerns that in the future, this situation will be problematic if the industrial sector recovers and the economy starts growing again. The latest power generation tenders date from 2017 for thermal and 2018 for renewables, and since then, nothing else has been done to increase supply. Some of these projects are already in operation, but most of them are paralyzed due to the financial crisis that Argentina has dragged on since 2018, and the government has not given any indication of what it will do with these contracts, since most of them, especially the renewables ones, have missed all milestones. When we look at the transmission sector, we see that the main problem that Argentina will have to face when it decides to increase its power generation capacity will be the lack of transport. At this point in time, there is no space left in the high voltage lines. The government is clear about this and has a portfolio to develop at least 6 500K lines throughout the country. We usually get questions from our clients about what will happen with renewable energy in Argentina. And we need to say that so far, what we have seen is that it's off the government's agenda. The Alberto Fernandez administration first demoted the Undersecretariat of Renewable Energies to a national directorate. That's a body that has no decision-making power. Nevertheless, Argentina must comply with a renewable energy law, which says that large local consumers must acquire 8% of their power from renewable sources as of 2018. And that's a value that will increase annually by 2% until reaching at 20% in 2025. So if the government does not take measures to encourage the sector, it will be very difficult to meet these goals. But let's see now what happened to the projects awarded in the last years. Currently, at least 13 wind projects and 34 solar projects never started construction. All of them were awarded in the Renovar 1, Renovar 1.2, and Renovar 2 tenders, and also in the dispatch priority assignment rounds carried out by the state-owned wholesaler Gamesa. All of them have failed to comply with each of the milestones established in the contracts because the financial crisis that Argentina has been suffering since 2018 made it impossible for them to get funding. So many ask if the natural gas is the answer. In 2018, when Argentina chaired the G20 summit, it proposed that natural gas producing countries could make a transition to renewables with power generation based on this fluid. And the fall in the price of natural gas has further reinforced the theory, as it has made electricity from thermal power plants even cheaper compared to renewables. The situation for Argentina, however, shows a drop in natural gas production. The government has tried to reverse this drop with implementation of the so-called Gas 4 plan. However, it will only be able to reach the level seen at the end of 2019 in 4 years. This winter, it will even have to use a regasification ship again to inject LNG in order to supply demand, since Bolivia has reduced its sales and local production is not enough to cover internal consumption. So with this, I leave you again with Mike.
Thank you, Cesar. That's all we have time for in this Electric Power Outlook podcast. We'd like to thank our subscribers for trusting BNamericas to help their business needs in Latin America. For those who aren't subscribers, we invite you to trial our service by accessing our platform.
Clients change, businesses change. The world is transforming faster than ever, and the opportunities are there, waiting for us. Over 20 years of digital innovation have turned us into the leading business intelligence provider in Latin America. BNamericas has a database with thousands of industrial projects, company profiles, key contacts, news, reports, and data, all in one easy-to-use platform. Every day, more than 50 on-the-ground journalists and experts analyze the region's major industries. Explore projects that feature opportunities for your business. Find the companies participating in those projects and connect with their decision makers. Make the best business decisions with all the facts and insights you need about the industries that are driving the Latin American economy. Get timely reports with the latest news about projects, regulations, and investments. Stay on top of the business trends. Find out what the risks and opportunities are for your business by reading the reports and analysis of our on-the-ground experts throughout Latin America. Redefine your business strategy and choose the path to success. BNamericas, connecting opportunities.